In the cold, dark void of space, a massive alien warship drifted near a long-abandoned human vessel. The human ship was ancient, its metal hull scarred and worn by countless years in the harsh environment of space. The aliens, a reptilian species known as the Karath, had been searching for anything that could give them an advantage in their ongoing war against a rival species. When their sensors detected the dormant ship, curiosity and desperation led them to investigate. A team of Karath soldiers, their scales shimmering under the dim lights of their suits, boarded the derelict human vessel. The air inside was stale, the atmosphere thick with the scent of decay. As they moved cautiously through the narrow corridors, their footsteps echoed ominously in the silence. The ship was a graveyard, filled with the remains of its former crew, now little more than dust. At the heart of the ship, the Karath found something extraordinary. A large chamber, filled with rows of cryopods, each one containing the preserved body of a human soldier. Most of the pods were dark and lifeless, their inhabitants long dead. But one pod still hummed with a faint energy, its occupant preserved in perfect condition. The Karath leader, Captain Karax, approached the pod with a mixture of awe and fear. The human inside was unlike any they had ever seen. His body was muscular, his features sharp and imposing even in his frozen state. The alien captain knew immediately that this was no ordinary human. This was a super soldier, a relic from a time when humanity was feared across the galaxy. The Karath debated among themselves. Should they revive this ancient warrior? Could he be persuaded to fight for their cause, or would he be a threat to their very existence? In the end, their desperation outweighed their caution. They needed a weapon, and this human might be the key to victory. With trembling hands, Karax activated the pod's controls. The chamber filled with a low hum as the machinery whirred to life. Frost melted away from the glass, revealing the human's chiseled features in greater detail. His eyes remained closed, but the Karath could see the faint rise and fall of his chest as he began to breathe again. Minutes passed as the pod slowly brought the super soldier out of his long slumber. The Karath watched in tense silence, their weapons ready just in case. Finally, the human's eyes snapped open, glowing with an intense, almost inhuman light. He gasped, his first breath in centuries, and then he moved. The super soldier's movements were swift and precise. He stepped out of the pod with a grace that belied his size, his eyes scanning the room with a cold, calculating gaze. The Karath froze, unsure of what to do next. They had awoken the beast, but now they had to face the consequences. Where am I? The human's voice was deep and commanding, echoing in the alien chamber. He spoke in an ancient tongue, but the Karath's translators quickly deciphered his words. You are aboard an alien ship, Karax responded cautiously, stepping forward. We have revived you to aid us in our struggle. The human turned his gaze on the alien captain, his expression unreadable. And what makes you think I would help you? The question hung in the air, thick with tension. The Karath realized they might have made a grave mistake, but it was too late to turn back now. They had revived a force of nature, a warrior from humanity's darkest days, and they could only hope they could control him. But deep down they knew the truth. This was a human who had been trained for war, who had been created to be the perfect soldier. And now that he was awake, there was no telling what he would do. The Karath had gambled with forces beyond their understanding, and the consequences would soon become all too clear. The super soldier stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Captain Karax. The alien captain could feel the weight of that gaze, as if the human was calculating every possible threat in the room. The other Karath soldiers shifted nervously, their weapons at the ready, but they hesitated to make the first move. They had awoken this ancient warrior, and now they were uncertain how to handle him. We revived you because we need your strength, Karax began, trying to keep his voice steady. We are at war with a powerful enemy, and with your help, we could turn the tide in our favor. The super soldier's expression didn't change. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, and the Karath soldiers instinctively raised their weapons higher. The human didn't seem to care. Who is your enemy? He asked, his voice as cold as the void outside. The Xylar, Karax replied, a vicious race that seeks to conquer the galaxy. They are our common enemy. For a moment, the super soldier was silent as if considering the alien's words. Then, with a swiftness that took everyone by surprise, he lunged forward. Before any of the Karath could react, The super soldier had disarmed one of the aliens, ripping the weapon from its grasp with inhuman strength. He turned the weapon over in his hands, examining it with a clinical detachment. "This is primitive compared to what I'm used to," he muttered, almost to himself. Then, without warning, he tossed the weapon aside and grabbed the Karath soldier by the throat. The alien gasped, its scaled fingers clawing at the super soldier's iron grip, but it was no use. "Tell me why I shouldn't kill you all right now," the human demanded, his eyes locked onto Karax. The captain felt a surge of panic. This was not going as he had hoped. "We are not your enemies," he cried out. "We only seek to survive. We awakened you because we believed you could help us." The super soldier tightened his grip for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a suddenness that left the Karath reeling, he released the alien soldier, who collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "I'm not here to fight your wars," the super soldier said, his voice like steel. "I was created to protect humanity, not to serve some alien agenda." Krax took a step back, realizing just how dangerous this human was. They had hoped to control him, to use his power for their own purposes, but it was clear now that he was far beyond their ability to manipulate. "What do you want?" Krax asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "I want answers," the super soldier replied. "How long have I been asleep? What happened to Earth?" The Karath exchanged nervous glances. They had only a limited understanding of human history, but they knew enough to realize that this soldier was from a time long past. "You've been in cryo sleep for over 1,000 years, Krax admitted. "As for Earth, it no longer plays a role in the galaxy. The humans are scattered, their power diminished." The super soldier's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Krax feared he would lash out again. But instead, the human simply turned away, pacing the length of the room with a measured stride. 1,000 years, he repeated quietly. "Everything I knew is gone." The Karath soldiers watched him warily, unsure of what he would do next. They had expected him to be a mindless weapon, something they could point at their enemies and unleash. But this human was far more complex, driven by motives they didn't understand. Finally, the super soldier stopped and faced Karax again. "I won't fight your war," he said firmly, "but I will find out what happened to my people. And if you stand in my way, I will destroy you." The threat hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. The Karath knew they had no choice but to comply. They had awoken a force they could not control, and now they had to live with the consequences of their actions. As the super soldier left the room, the aliens were left with a growing sense of dread. They had made a terrible mistake, and the real consequences were only beginning to unfold. The alien warship was a hive of activity as the Karath scrambled to contain the situation. The super soldier was no longer in the holding chamber. He had slipped through their defenses like a ghost, moving through the ship with terrifying efficiency. Every attempt to corner him ended in disaster. Now, the Karath leaders were beginning to realize the full extent of their mistake. Captain Karax stood in the war room, surrounded by his officers, all of whom looked as nervous as he felt. The screens on the walls showed security footage of the human soldier dismantling entire squads with his bare hands, using alien technology against its creators, and moving with a speed and precision that defied belief. "He's unstoppable," one of the officers muttered, his voice tinged with fear. "We can't let him reach the command center. If he takes control of the ship—" Krax cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I know the risks," he snapped, though his own fear was starting to show. "We have to find a way to neutralize him before he does any more damage." But deep down, Karax knew that was easier said than done. They had awakened something far beyond their control. The super soldier was not just a warrior, he was a weapon designed to be the ultimate protector of humanity. Now that he was awake, he was following his last orders: eliminate any threat to Earth no matter the cost. As Karax considered his next move, a sudden alert blared through the ship. "Security breach on Deck 12!" A voice crackled over the intercom. "He's heading for the reactor core!" The war room fell into chaos as the Karath officers scrambled to respond. Krax's mind raced. If the human reached the reactor core, he could cripple the entire ship, leaving them stranded and vulnerable in the middle of enemy space. There was no time to waste. "Deploy all available forces to intercept him," Krax ordered. "We cannot let him reach the core." Meanwhile, the super soldier moved through the ship's corridors with the precision of a predator on the hunt. His senses were sharp, his mind focused. The alien architecture was unfamiliar, but his training allowed him to quickly adapt. turning the ship's own layout to his advantage. He had already disabled several key systems, and now he was heading for the reactor. If he could take it offline, the Karath would be forced to retreat or risk destruction. As he approached the reactor chamber, the super soldier encountered another squad of Karath soldiers. They opened fire, but their weapons were no match for his enhanced reflexes. He dodged their shots with ease, closing the distance between them in the blink of an eye. With a few swift movements, he disarmed them, leaving the soldiers stunned and defenseless. One of the Karath, a young soldier barely out of training, fell to his knees, trembling in fear. "Please," he begged, his voice shaking. "We didn't mean to harm you. We only wanted your help." The super soldier paused, his cold eyes locking onto the aliens. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "You made a mistake," he said, his voice flat, "and now you'll have to live with the consequences." With that, he turned and continued toward the reactor, leaving the Karath soldier behind. The alien slumped to the floor, his heart pounding in his chest. The realization was beginning to sink in. They had awoken a force that could not be controlled, a being who saw them as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. In the war room, Karax watched helplessly as the security feeds showed the super soldier nearing the reactor. They had tried everything, force, negotiation, even sabotage, but nothing could stop him. Regret gnawed at Karax's insides. They had hoped to gain an ally in their war, but instead they had unleashed a nightmare upon themselves. "Prepare for emergency evacuation," Karax finally ordered, his voice hollow. "We have to abandon ship before he destroys us all." The officers looked at him in disbelief, but they knew there was no other option. The regret in the room was palpable as they began to carry out the captain's orders. They had underestimated the humans' power, and now they were paying the price. As the super soldier reached the reactor core, he began the process of disabling it. The ship shuddered as systems started to fail, lights flickering and alarms blaring. The Karath scrambled to escape, their once mighty warship now a death trap. They had gambled everything on reviving the human, and now they were living the nightmare of their own making. The Karath warship was in chaos. With the reactor on the verge of meltdown, the once proud vessel was now a crumbling tomb. Captain Karax had ordered an emergency evacuation, but even as escape pods launched into the void, he knew they were far from safe. The super soldier, the human they had awakened, was still on board, and now he was hunting them. Karax and a handful of his most loyal officers made their way through the darkened corridors of the ship, their footsteps echoing ominously. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The ship's systems were failing, but the danger from within was far greater than anything the failing machinery could produce. "We have to stop him before he gets to the escape pods," one of the officers whispered, his voice thick with fear. "If he takes control of one, he could follow us, hunt us down." Krax knew the officer was right. The human was a predator, and now that they were fleeing, he would see them as prey. But how could they stop him? Every attempt to trap or ambush him had failed, leaving more Karath dead in his wake. The super soldier moved like a shadow, striking without warning, his presence felt only in the aftermath of his destruction. As they rounded a corner, Karax's group stumbled upon the remains of another Karath squad. The soldiers lay scattered across the floor, their bodies broken and twisted. The sight sent a chill down Karax's spine. The super soldier had passed through here, and he was close. "Keep moving," Karax ordered, though his own legs felt like lead. He knew they were running out of time. "Keep moving," Karax ordered, though his own legs felt like lead. He knew they were running out of time. The human was toying with them like a cat playing with its prey. He could strike at any moment, and they were helpless to stop him. Meanwhile, the super soldier moved silently through the ship, his senses heightened by the thrill of the hunt. The Karath had proven to be no match for him, their tactics predictable, their fear palpable. He could hear their panicked whispers, feel the vibrations of their frantic movements through the ship's metal walls. They thought they could escape him, but there was no escape. Not now. His mind was focused, his mission clear. These aliens had revived him, thinking they could use him for their own purposes. They had made a fatal mistake. Now he would make sure they understood the full extent of their error. He was the ultimate weapon, forged in the fires of humanity's darkest wars, and he would not be controlled by anyone, especially not by those who sought to use him. As he closed in on the escape pods, the super soldier slowed his pace, listening carefully. The Karath were nearby. He could sense their fear, smell the sweat on their scales. They were trying to get off the ship to escape his wrath, but he would not let them go so easily. They had unleashed him, and now they would face the consequences. Karax and his officers reached the final corridor leading to the escape pods. Relief washed over them as they saw the pods lined up waiting to be launched. But their relief was short-lived. As they approached, the super soldier stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. The Karath froze, their eyes wide with terror. Karax instinctively reached for his weapon, but he knew it was useless. The human was faster, stronger, and far more deadly than any of them. Still, he had to try. "Stop!" Karax shouted, raising his weapon. "We can negotiate! There's no need for more bloodshed." The super soldier's eyes were cold, unfeeling. "You made your choice when you woke me," he replied, his voice as icy as space itself. "Now you live with the consequences." In the blink of an eye, the super soldier moved, disarming Karax with a swift, brutal motion. The weapon clattered to the floor, and Karax felt a sharp pain in his chest as the human struck him down. The other officers tried to flee, but the super soldier was relentless. He moved through them like a storm, his strikes precise, lethal. When it was over, Karax lay on the cold metal floor, gasping for breath. The super soldier stood over him, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have woken me," the human said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. Karax tried to speak, to plead for mercy, but the words wouldn't come. The super soldier turned away, leaving the captain to his fate. As the human entered one of the escape pods and prepared to launch, Karax realized with a sinking heart that their nightmare was far from over. They had failed to control the human, and now he was free. The pod launched into space, disappearing into the void. Karax could only watch as the ship around him began to crumble, the reactor's failure reaching its peak. The hunt was over, but the real terror had just begun. The super soldier was out there somewhere, and the galaxy would never be the same. The escape pod hurtled through space, leaving the wreckage of the Karath warship far behind. Inside, the super soldier sat silently, his eyes fixed on the display in front of him. The pod's systems hummed softly, the only sound in the confined space. He had escaped the dying ship, but his mission was far from over. As the stars streaked past, the super soldier's mind was a whirl of thoughts. The Karath had revived him, believing they could control him, but they had underestimated the depth of his loyalty to humanity. He was no puppet, no tool for their alien war. He was a protector, and he would not rest until he understood what had happened to his people. The pod's navigation system pinged, indicating that it had locked onto a nearby planet. The super soldier leaned forward, studying the data. The planet was a small, rocky world on the edge of the Karath Empire's territory. It was uninhabited, but it had resources he could use to repair the pod and plan his next move. He had no intention of staying there long, but it would serve as a temporary base while he figured out his next steps. As the pod entered the planet's atmosphere, the super soldier's thoughts drifted back to the Karath. They had been so confident, so certain they could bend him to their will. But now they were scattered, their ship in ruins, and their hopes shattered. They had unleashed him without understanding the consequences, and now they were paying the price. The pod landed with a gentle thud on the planet's surface. The super soldier quickly scanned the area, ensuring there were no immediate threats. Satisfied, he opened the hatch and stepped out, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. The air was thin and cold, but he barely noticed. His enhanced physiology allowed him to endure conditions that would have killed a normal human. He began to gather materials from the pod's storage, setting up a makeshift camp. He didn't plan to stay long, but he needed time to assess his situation. The Karath had mentioned that humanity was scattered, their power diminished. He needed to know what that meant and how he could find any surviving humans. As he worked, his mind was already calculating his next steps. The Karath might have other ships nearby, and they would no doubt be hunting him. He couldn't stay in one place for long, but he also couldn't risk being caught off guard. He needed to stay mobile, to keep the advantage of surprise on his side. Suddenly, a faint signal crackled through the pod's communication system. The super soldier paused, listening intently. It was weak, barely a whisper, but it was there, an emergency distress call. It was human. His heart raced as he traced the signal's origin. It was coming from deep within Karath space, from a remote outpost on the edge of their empire. The signal was old, likely from a human colony that had been cut off during the wars. But it was a lead, and that was more than he had a moment ago. Without hesitation, the super soldier began preparing the pod for launch again. The planet had served its purpose, now it was time to move on. He needed to reach that outpost, to find out if any of his people were still alive. If the Karath had missed this colony, there could be others. Humanity might still have a chance. As he re-entered the pod and initiated the launch sequence, the super soldier's thoughts turned to the Karath once more. They would be searching for him, desperate to undo the damage they had caused. But he was no longer their problem. He had a new mission now, and nothing would stand in his way. The pod lifted off, shooting back into the cold expanse of space. The super soldier set a course for the distress signal, his resolve hardening with every passing moment. He was a weapon, forged for battle, but now he had a purpose beyond survival. He would find the remnants of humanity wherever they were hiding, and together they would rise again. As the pod sped through the stars, the super soldier felt a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years. The Karath had unleashed him, but they had also given him the one thing he needed most, a reason to fight. And this time, he was fighting not just for himself, but for the survival of his entire species. The escape was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come.